It feels like we're living through a modern-day gold rush. But this time, the gold isn't something you dig out of the ground. It's artificial intelligence. And the amount of money flooding into this space, it's just astronomical. So today, we're going to follow the money. We'll see who's investing, where all that cash is actually going, and what it's building. Let's get into it.
All right, let's just start with a number that, honestly, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around. $840 billion. To put that in perspective for you, that's more than the entire GDP of countries like Sweden or Argentina. And that, right there, is the valuation for just one single company at the center of this whole thing, OpenAI.
So you might be asking, how does a company even get to be worth that much? Well, it happens through investment rounds like this one, a single funding event of $110 billion. And this isn't just a big number, okay? This is one of the largest private capital raises ever, in history.
So who is writing these absolutely colossal checks? Well, this chart breaks it down for us. It's a who's who of tech giants and investment funds. You've got Amazon dropping $50 billion, NVIDIA in for $30 billion, and the massive investment fund SoftBank putting in another $30 billion. These aren't just investments, you guys. These are gigantic strategic bets on what the future of AI is going to look like. Okay, so let's follow one of those money trails, specifically NVIDIA's. In this whole gold rush analogy, they've become the #1 supplier of the picks and shovels. But their strategy, it goes way beyond just selling computer chips. They're building something they call the AI factory.
The company's whole game plan is captured perfectly right here, in this quote from their CEO, Jensen Huang. He saw this strategic pivot coming. After the whole crypto boom started to fade, AI was clearly the next massive wave. The goal was to completely transform NVIDIA from a company that just sells you parts into a company that provides the entire infrastructure for AI at a mind-boggling scale. And how are they pulling this off? Well, it's all about aggressive vertical integration. Just look at this stack. It all starts with their famous GPUs, right? The Quartz chips. But then they went out and bought a company called Mellanox so they could control the networking that connects all those chips. They even developed their own CPUs, the Grace processor. And the glue holding it all together is their own software, like CUDA. They basically control every single layer of the process.
But they didn't stop there. Oh no, they're also expanding horizontally, pushing their tech into pretty much every major industry you can think of. They've got partnerships in self-driving cars with Uber and Toyota, deep ties with every single major cloud provider, and they're even working with Disney Research on robotics. The goal is pretty clear. They want NVIDIA technology to be the engine behind the next industrial revolution, which of course raises some big questions about what happens when one company provides the foundation for everyone else's innovation.
And this is where things get, really interesting, and maybe a little concerning, depending on who you ask. It creates this fascinating loop. So NVIDIA pumps billions into a company like OpenAI. And what does OpenAI do? They turn right around and use that exact same money to buy billions of dollars worth of NVIDIA's hardware. You see it? It's a totally circular flow of cash, and it raises a huge question. Is this creating real demand, or is it just a way to artificially inflate a massive AI bubble?
That very question leads us to some really fascinating economic theory that might just explain this entire boom and, its potential fragility. Could this whole thing be a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy? The whole idea is called speculative growth, and what it suggests is that these sky-high valuations, they aren't necessarily crazy. Actually, they might be totally essential. The theory is that the super high prices themselves are what attract the massive investment needed to build the actual infrastructure, all the data centers, the chips, the research, that will one day hopefully justify those prices. This diagram from MIT economist Ricardo Caballero really shows how this plays out visually. Think of that green line as the super optimistic path. That's the speculative growth we're all hoping for. High valuations and investor confidence literally pull the entire economy upwards towards a future with tons of capital and amazing AI. But, and this is the important part, look at that fragile red line. That's the crash path. If confidence starts to wobble, the whole system can suddenly flip, and those same high valuations that fueled the boom could trigger a total collapse. And that, right there, is the key takeaway. The very same thing that makes this incredible boom possible, that is, sustained, optimistic belief from everyone involved, is also its biggest weakness. This entire transition is unbelievably fragile. It all depends on everyone continuing to believe in it, together.
So, with so much on the line, it's no surprise that companies are literally re-engineering their corporate DNA to survive in this kind of environment. I mean, the old ways of setting up a company just weren't built for this kind of intense pressure and capital burn.
Just look at OpenAI. They started out with this really novel capped profit model, where they actually limited how much money investors could make. It was a cool experiment in trying to balance their mission with making a profit. But to fund the race to AGI, they needed way more cash. So they switched over to a public benefit corporation, which is a legal structure that forces them to balance profit with a public mission. And that allowed them to uncap the profits and bring in those massive investments we talked about earlier.
Okay, so this table really lays it all out, side by side. You can see how the different players are tackling this. On one side, you've got OpenAI and Anthropic. They're both using this Public Benefit Corporation model, or PBC. They're trying to hardwire their mission into their legal DNA, using things like nonprofits or special trusts to control the board. Then you've got the other side of the coin. Think Elon Musk's xAI or the big guys like Google and Meta. They're sticking to more traditional setups, your standard C Corps, where the power really stays with the founders, through things like having the majority of shares. So every single one of these is a different attempt to answer the same absolutely critical question. How in the world do you govern something this powerful?
Now, all of this money, this consolidation of power, it hasn't gone unnoticed. The final players are now stepping onto the field, government regulators, and they are starting to ask some very tough questions.
Yep, on both sides of the Atlantic, in the US and the EU, antitrust authorities are launching official investigations. They're taking a very close look at these huge partnership deals and investments between the tech giants and the leading AI startups.
And here are the central questions they're trying to answer. Are these deals just a way for the big, established companies to snuff out new competition before it even gets off the ground? Are they creating monopoly choke points around key technologies like chips or cloud computing? And maybe the scariest question of all, could AI itself be used to create new, sneaky forms of collusion between companies?
And listen, these aren't just abstract theoretical concerns. This quote right here from the head of the U.S. Federal Trade Commission, Lina Khan, makes that crystal clear. The big fear is that this incredible new technology, instead of unleashing a new wave of competition, could actually end up cementing the dominance of the existing tech giants for decades to come.
And so that leaves us with the core tension of this entire AI gold rush. Is all this money fueling an unbelievable engine of innovation that's going to benefit all of humanity? Or are we just watching in real time the construction of the most powerful monopolies the world has ever seen? The final chapter of that story? Well, it's still being written.